I must be the dumbest person alive. My wife had just given birth to a beautiful baby boy in the hospital. A brown-eyed, red-haired little one. Sirens were blaring in my head. The baby's skin was so fair, and those adorable dimples made him all the more charming. But as it turns out, some stories are destined to unfold. My wife had told her version, and now it was my turn to uncover the truth. Hi, I'm Jeff Patterson, and my wife is none other than the one and only Jen. Never in my wildest dreams did I think Jen would cheat on me. I've loved her with every ounce of my heart. Before we got together, Jen was married to Hugh for 8 years, and they had a son. Hugh Jr. Hugh Sr. never gave me any trouble because he had absolutely no interest in what Jen was up to. I know this for a fact because Hugh is actually one of my lodge brothers. From the very start, Hugh had made his opinion about Jen crystal clear. He said, "Jeff, you can't turn her into a wife." I was livid, and naturally, I wanted to take him outside to settle the matter. When we stepped outside, Hugh raised his hand and asked, "Why are we fighting?" "Hugh," I replied, "I can't let you call my wife a She might be your ex, but she's my wife now." Hugh stood there for a moment, looking at me, before saying, "You're right, Jeff. I'm sorry. But as a brother of this lodge, if the day ever comes when you need my help, don't hesitate to ask." He shook my hand, and we both went back inside. It would be a while before I heard him call Jen again. From that point onward, I felt like Hugh had become my friend. He never seemed to have any personal grudge against me and even supported a few of my motions in the lodge. So I had no issue with him. Jen, on the other hand, despised Hugh with every fiber of her being. At lodge events, she always went out of her way to outshine him and his wife, Sammy. One day, Sammy was chatting with some of the other wives when Jen approached and asked, "How's that scumbag doing?" Sammy smiled sweetly and replied, "He's doing great. He just got me a Range Rover. It's a few years old now, but it's perfect for the family." Jen retorted, "I haven't seen him in ages. What's he up to? Probably at some bar." Sammy replied calmly, "Nope. He's outside talking to the lodge president about building a kids' clubhouse." Hearing that, Jen stormed off and came straight to me. "We need a new car," she said. "A Range Rover, fully loaded." I shook my head, knowing exactly what had sparked this demand. Hugh had recently shared how he'd traded in his truck to buy Sammy that Range Rover. He'd said Sammy needed it for her job and the kids. Hugh always made sacrifices for his family, even if it meant driving an old, rusty Ford F-150. "Jen," I said, "money doesn't grow on trees. Once you're back to work, you'll have to help pay for it." Jen had been unemployed since shortly after we got married. Before that, she'd found a job following her divorce from Hugh. Begrudgingly, she left to chat with the other wives while I joined the lodge brothers. After an hour, I started looking for Jen and finally spotted her on the dance floor with another lodge brother. I walked over and interrupted. "Hi, honey," she greeted me. "How are you?" "Nothing. Just here to dance with my sexy wife," I said, cutting in. As the lodge brother walked away, I asked, "Having fun?" "Yes," she replied with a wink. "But it'd be even better if you took me home and put me to bed." That was all the encouragement I needed. Jen grabbed her purse, and we headed for the door. I waved goodbye to the brothers as we left. The moment we got in the car, Jen climbed on top of me. "Drive," she shouted. It was so intense, I nearly hit a nun. By the time we got home, things got even steamier, and that night was unforgettable. The next morning, I was browsing the Range Rover website, feeling pretty good about how things were going for us. Work was steady, the cottage was in great shape, and our sex life was incredible. Then Jen dropped a bombshell. "Jeff," she said, "I'm 3 weeks pregnant." The first thought that hit me was, I'm 45 and about to have a baby. By the time this kid leaves for college, I'll be ancient or worse on welfare. I already had 2 kids. Sandy, a senior at LSU, and Jacob, a junior at Ole Mississippi. Hugh Jr., Jen's son, was now 25 and had a child of his own. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "I just got back from the doctor. Do you know if it's a boy or a girl?" "We need to talk about that," Jen said. Do you really want another baby? I asked her what she wanted, and she replied, we need to think about it. That conversation stretched into a long, sleepless night. The next morning, as Jen was leaving, I asked, what's on the agenda for today? I'll give you a call after I get my hair done, she replied with a smile. Love you, sexy. Love you too, I said as she disappeared out the door. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. Hello. Good morning, the caller said. Is Mrs. Patterson home? No, but I'm her husband. How can I help you? Your wife left her credit card at the front desk, the polite voice informed me. Where's the front desk? I asked. The Hyatt Regency East, he replied. Something didn't sit right. Why would my wife be at a hotel? I immediately called Visa for an itemized statement of her recent charges. When I called Visa, I asked for a detailed breakdown of charges. The woman on the other end politely asked me for the card number. Of course, I didn't have it, so I told her, check both cards under my name. Please hold for a moment, she said before putting me on a brief hold. A few seconds later, she returned to say she needed to consult her supervisor. My mind was racing as I waited, wondering what the statement might reveal. When she finally came back on the line, she asked, Sir, can you confirm a few transactions for me? Of course, I replied, trying to keep calm. She began listing several charges, most of which seemed normal. Then she said, and there's a charge for a room at the Hyatt Regency East, made last night. Does that sound correct? My heart sank. No, I said firmly. That's not mine. Can you tell me the name on the booking? I'm sorry, sir, but I can't provide that information, she said apologetically. After thanking her, I hung up and sat there, my mind racing with possibilities. Why would my wife need a room at a hotel? What could she possibly be doing there? Determined to get answers, I drove straight to the Hyatt Regency East. When I arrived, I went straight to the front desk. Hi, I said to the clerk. I'm Jeff Patterson. My wife left her credit card here, and I'd like to pick it up. The clerk smiled politely and handed me the card. Here you go, Mr. Patterson. I glanced around the lobby, trying to spot anything suspicious. Excuse me, I said, leaning in closer to the clerk. Can you tell me what room this card was used to pay for? I'm sorry, sir, he replied. I can't disclose that information. I knew I wasn't going to get much further without some serious digging, so I thanked him and left. But my mind was already spiraling. Who was Jen with? What was she hiding? When I got back home, Jen was already there, sitting on the couch with her phone. Hey, babe, she greeted me cheerfully. How's your day going? I tried to act normal, even though I was boiling inside. Fine, I replied. What about you? Good, she said, smiling. Got my hair done and ran a few errands. I nodded but didn't press her further. I needed to gather more evidence before confronting her. Over the next few days, I started keeping a closer eye on Jen's behavior. She was always on her phone, often stepping out of the room to take calls. Her smile seemed a little forced, and her usual affection felt mechanical, like she was trying too hard to cover something up. Then one night, while she was asleep, I decided to check her phone. I knew it was a breach of trust, but I needed answers. As I scrolled through her messages, one name kept popping up. Chris. Who the hell was Chris? Their messages were vague but frequent. Things like, had a great time yesterday, and can't wait to see you again. My stomach churned as I read more. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but I needed confirmation. The next morning, while Jen was out, I called a private investigator. If there was something to uncover, I wanted every detail. A few days later, the investigator called me back with the results. Mr. Patterson, he said, I have something you need to see. Can we meet in person? Of course, I replied, my heart pounding. When we met, he handed me a folder filled with photos. There she was, Jen with another man. They were at a cafe holding hands. In another photo, they were walking into the Hyatt Regency East together. My worst fears had been confirmed. I sat there, staring at the evidence, trying to process it all. How could she do this to me? After everything we'd been through? When I got home that evening, Jen was sitting at the kitchen table, smiling as if nothing had happened. Hey, babe, she said cheerfully. How was your day? I dropped the folder on the table in front of her. What the hell is this, Jen? Her smile faded as she opened the folder and saw the pictures. Jeff, I can explain. Explain? I interrupted, my voice rising. Explain how you've been sneaking around with another man? How you've been lying to me? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't sure if they were from guilt or because she'd been caught. Jeff, she began, her voice trembling. It's not what it looks like. Then what is it, Jen? I demanded. Because it looks like you've been cheating on me. She was silent, staring at the pictures. Finally, she muttered, I'm sorry, Jeff. That was all I needed to hear. My marriage was over. Her words hit me like a freight train. Sorry? I repeated, my voice cracking. That's all you've got to say? Sorry? Jen looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, but I wasn't in the mood for her dramatics. How long has this been going on? I demanded. It wasn't serious, she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Not serious? I scoffed, slamming my hand on the table. You've been sneaking around with another man? Staying at hotels? Lying to my face? And you call that not serious? She flinched at my tone but didn't answer. I stared at her, waiting for more, but the silence stretched on. Finally, I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. Where are you going? She asked, standing up from the table. Away from here, I snapped without looking back. Don't wait up. I drove aimlessly for hours, replaying everything in my mind. Every moment, every smile, every touch. It all felt tainted now. How had I missed the signs? I thought back to all the little things that didn't add up. The unexplained absences, the sudden phone calls, the growing distance between us. Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot and sat there, staring at the steering wheel. My anger began to give way to heartbreak. I had loved Jen with every fiber of my being. I had trusted her. And now, everything we'd built together was crumbling before my eyes. I knew I couldn't stay in limbo forever. I needed a plan. The next morning, I returned home to find Jen waiting for me in the living room. She looked like she hadn't slept all night, her eyes puffy and red. Jeff, she started as soon as I walked in. We need to talk. I dropped my keys on the counter and crossed my arms. Talk? About what, Jen? About how you've been cheating on me. About how you've been lying to my face while I worked my ass off to provide for us. What's left to talk about? She took a deep breath. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand. Chris doesn't mean anything to me. It was just a distraction. A distraction? I repeated, incredulous. That's your excuse? You were bored. So you decided to ruin our marriage? No, she exclaimed. It wasn't like that. I don't even know why I did it. I felt lost, Jeff. After the baby news, after everything, I felt like I was losing myself. Her words stung, but they didn't absolve her. And instead of talking to me, you ran to someone else, I said coldly. You made me a fool, Jen. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I'm sorry, she choked out. I love you, Jeff. I don't want to lose you. I stood there, torn between anger and sadness. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to believe that we could move past this. But another part of me, the part that felt betrayed, knew that things would never be the same. I need time, I said finally. Jen looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes. We can fix this, she said desperately. We can go to counseling. I'll do whatever it takes. I don't know if this can be fixed, I admitted. You broke something, Jen. And I don't know if it can be put back together. Her tears fell harder, but I didn't stay to console her. I walked into the bedroom, packed a bag, and left the house. Over the next few weeks, I stayed with a friend while I tried to sort through my feelings. Jen called and texted constantly, begging me to come home, but I wasn't ready. I needed to figure out if I could ever trust her again. Eventually, I decided to meet with her. We sat down in a neutral space, a park bench near the lake where we used to take walks together. Jeff, she began, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. I made a terrible mistake, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I love you. I love our family. Please, give me a chance to make this right. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of the woman I had fallen in love with. I saw pain. I saw regret. But I also saw someone who had betrayed me in the worst way possible. Jen, I said slowly, I loved you more than anything. I trusted you. And you threw that away. Her lip trembled, but she didn't interrupt. I don't know if I can forgive you, I continued. I don't know if I'll ever be able to look at you the same way again. But for the sake of our child, I'm willing to try. Her eyes lit up with hope. Thank you, Jeff, she whispered. Thank you. But I added firmly, this is your last chance. One more lie, one more betrayal, and we're done. Do you understand? She nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her face. Only time would tell if our marriage could survive. But one thing was certain, things would never be the same. As the weeks turned into months, Jen and I worked hard to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. We started attending counseling sessions, where we aired our grievances, fears, and hopes. Slowly, the cracks in our marriage began to mend, but the scars remained as reminders of the betrayal we had faced. Jen did her best to prove she was committed to making things right. She cut off all contact with Chris, got a job to help with the finances, and took every opportunity to show me that she was serious about us. For my part, I tried to let go of the bitterness and anger that had taken root in my heart. It wasn't easy, but for the sake of our child and the love I still felt deep down, I gave it my best shot. But no matter how hard we worked, something had shifted irreparably between us. Trust, once broken, is never the same. There were moments when I thought we might make it, but there were also moments when the doubts crept back in. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, Jen turned to me and said, "Thank you for giving me another chance. Jeff, I'll never take you for granted again." I looked at her, searching her face for the sincerity I desperately needed to see. "I hope so, Jen," I replied, "because this is it. If we ever go back to where we were, I won't stay. I can't." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I understand," she whispered. And so we moved forward step by step, one day at a time. Life wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was real. And in the end, that was enough. Only time would tell if our story would have a happy ending, but for now, we were still standing. And sometimes that's the best you can hope for.